now seen two major players on the world stage hinting at food rationing or food shortages. Christine Lagarde of the European Central Bank told us recently we need to prepare for food rationing. And now Keir Starmer refuses to rule out food shortages and is saying people will need to change their habits. He talks about where they go on holiday this year and also what they're buying in the supermarket. Take a listen to this hogwash.
You've repeatedly said it's not our war. The problem is, as you already mentioned, it is affecting all of us, isn't it? And people are desperately worried about that. So you're chairing this crisis cabinet committee tomorrow. I wondered if you could just level with the British public. You know, are you worried about fuel and food shortages? Is that why you're chairing that committee?
There is going to be an impact on the UK. There already is. And I think it's really important I level with the public that we are doing everything we can to get the Strait of Hormuz open, because obviously that is vital in terms of minimising the impact. But I don't want anybody to think that once the Strait is open, that that's the end of the damage. It'll go on longer than that. And that's why we've got almost daily meetings of ministers and officials looking at how we manage the impact. At the moment, we're confident about supply. We have reopened a CO2 plant in the northeast. Airlines are telling us that they've got enough jet fuel at the moment.
But when you say at the moment, for how long?
Well, we monitor this all of the time, and they have told us so far that they've got the supplies that they need.
But summer holidays could be in jeopardy.
Well, that's why we manage it. I think what we'll see how long the conflict goes on. I can see that if there's more impact, people might change their habits, where they go on holiday this year, what they're buying in the supermarket, that sort of thing.
So you are, I mean, really your message to the public is don't panic, but actually there may be some shortages of food and fuel.
Don't panic, but we chose not to get involved in this war. That was the right thing to do, but we must protect the British people from the impact of it.
Now, whether or not actual food shortages reach the West, you best believe there will be people in the upper echelons of power that will make sure food shortages are in place. Why? Well, there are a myriad of reasons, but control of what you eat, how much you eat, and how much you can afford to eat happens to be a very powerful tool of tyrants. And it's a published goal, by the way, ARUP, the Future of Cities in a 1.5-degree world, clearly outlining foods on the banned list, such as meat and dairy, not to mention publications from organizations like C40 Cities about how many calories people will be allowed to consume and what sort of foods will be allowed as part of that peasant calorie allocation. They are seizing on this crisis to achieve their Agenda 2030 goals, and someone who's been tracking this current situation in detail is Health Ranger Mike Adams. He warns that while famine is certain for some countries, and to be clear, that doesn't mean the West, those in the West will seize the opportunity for not just our food, but much more, including an expansion of the digital control agenda and how this all comes together. Mike joins us to discuss after a quick word from the sponsor of this show, the Satellite Phone Store. The New World Order has openly declared war on the free people of the world, and now they're telling us to expect catastrophic cyber attacks over the next 2 years. Weather events, no power, grids down, mobile cell services out. Contact your loved ones anywhere, anytime with the Satellite Phone Store. The Bivvy is a revolutionary GPS-based device which allows you to send SMS messages via your phone even if you have no mobile or cell service. Galileo will ensure you always stay in contact with Z Media, other trusted information sources, and your loved ones that can update you in real time in the event of an emergency. Don't be caught out and unprepared for the unprecedented times we are living in. Stay 10 steps ahead through secure, encrypted communication. Visit sat123.com/Maria and prepare yourself and your loved ones now. Mike Adams, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate you coming on.
Hey, it's great to join you, Maria. Thank you so much. We sure have a lot to talk about, don't we?
Yeah, we absolutely do. We absolutely do. Just this morning, we got some news in that more than half of the Middle East urea output may have been lost since the start of the Iran conflict, according to CRU, which is threatening global food inflation. We saw Christine Lagarde of the ECB tell us that we need to start preparing for food rationing. I know you've been tracking this very closely, Mike. How close are we to a famine?
Well, a famine in certain countries is now a certainty, but that's only because those countries, and we can talk about what some of those countries are, they have already, like tens of millions of their people across these different countries have existed in a famine scenario anyway. Every year they're only kept alive by food assistance, and they're identified by global organizations, the FAO or UNESCO or whoever, as being, these high risk famine populations anyway. Those are the ones that are most vulnerable, and easily that number is 45 million people in 2027. Now, this is what a lot of people don't realize, is that there's quite a long delay time here. And when you look at the countries in Africa, in the Middle East, and especially Southeast Asia, countries like Bangladesh, their planting seasons are, of course, quite different from what we are familiar with in North America, and the inverse in Australia. So a lot of these countries are going to be harvesting next in the fall and planting, right after that, planting in our October, November timeframe, which means that their crops will fail in 2027. And some countries will be planting this summer, and then their crops will fail, later this year, October, November timeframe for those. But the actual food runs out for many of these countries throughout late 2026 and all through 2027. And so, but we won't see people in North America or Canada or Australia or the UK just dropping over dead from mass starvation. But we will face much higher food prices and supply chain scarcity. We can talk about that in more detail.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that that's important to note. When people see, headlines about famines and things of this nature, they think, well, that'll never come here. And of course, it doesn't look like that's going to be the situation here. But when you have the head of the European Central Bank telling people to prepare for food rationing, it seems like a very, very good opportunity for them to start doing their Agenda 2030 goal of calorie controlling and controlling which types of foods you can eat. And of course, we have the Palantir integration into US farms. We will get into that. But to go on with the point that you wanted to about how prices are going to rise, I think this is a way that they're actually going to gain control of the Western food supply.
Yes, by pricing consumers out of the food choice market in Western countries, they can then offer government assistance, which, let's just call it a food UBI, right? It's beyond food stamps. It might be a universal basic income, but only usable for food. And then the way they will control that is through maybe a biometric system, a thumbprint, an iris scan, or some form of identity verification in order to be able to use those credits through typical retailers. And often Walmart is the first, to sign up for that program. So what the government will likely say in the US is, oh, you won't starve, don't worry. You've got, $500 of food credits each month. All you have to do is sign up for this program, where you have to give up all your privacy, and then they're tracking exactly what you're purchasing, and they can also shut it off if you make the wrong social media posts. So what we're really headed toward is a bifurcated type of society in the West, the wealthier nations, where you will have the really wealthy people who have plenty of money to live on and aren't hurting for cash. They'll be able to maintain their freedom and shop with their own cash. They won't use the food UBI system. They'll be able to buy whatever they want. But then what used to be the middle class will often be plunged into government dependence and government control. Yeah. And that's where they will get those people. They'll be able to track your location, your food purchasing habits, and then they will be able to combine that with metadata from your search engine results, and now monitoring you in your car, in your vehicle, monitoring your phone calls, metadata about who you call, when you call, what websites you're visiting, etc. They can assemble all of that and get a complete profile of you and use that weaponized against you to achieve the ultimate goal, which is, of course, depopulation. But maybe we'll get to that.
Well, you know what, Mike? I feel like a lot of people have forgotten that was the goal. You know, during the COVID era, it seemed to be a common understanding of a lot of people who woke up during that period that depopulation was the agenda. And it seems like a lot of people have been lulled into a false sense of security since then because things are seemingly normal. And they've forgotten that the goal is actually what the Georgia Guidestones said, which was 500 million people on Earth.
Yeah.
Please expand on the depopulation again, please.
So let's back up and do a little bit of history on this. I recently covered this, in fact. The New York Times did an article in 1969, and they were covering a meeting that was put together by 200 different groups, including UNESCO, and President Richard Nixon's science advisor was present at this meeting. And I think his name is Lee Dubridge. But also Dr. Paul Ehrlich was featured there, and he's, of course, the author of a book called The Population Bomb. And remember, this is 1969, and Dr. Ehrlich proposed in this meeting that they should lace the water supply with infertility chemicals. They should lace all food exports with infertility chemicals, especially, food going to Africa, for example. A lot of the depopulation efforts have often focused on Africa, and also Black populations in America through the abortion industry and the cancer industry, for example, but that's a whole nother show, really. But then the President Richard Nixon's science advisor agreed that depopulation, or what do you call it, population control, should be the #1 priority of every world government, or every nation in the world, is what he said. And since then, the depopulation agenda has simply morphed into different forms. The entire global warming narrative was a form of depopulation by taking away your access to energy, and affordable energy creates affordable food, which creates larger families, right? You have cheap food, you have more population growth. Global warming transitioned into climate change, but it was the same narrative, like you're bad for breathing. You're bad for using combustion engines. You're bad for using air conditioning. We have to shut down the energy infrastructure. And that's what Western nations did all across Western Europe, the United States, Canada. China, meanwhile, was building power infrastructure, which has served them quite well. But all the Western nations were basically committing energy suicide. And then we had, COVID, of course, and that was another depopulation agenda. Clearly, they tried to march people into agreeing to take euthanasia jabs, essentially. And they achieved some level of global depopulation, but nowhere near their goals. You mentioned the goal might be only 500 million people. Well, the globalists didn't kill anywhere close to that, maybe tens of millions around the world, but not even 1 billion people. So that brings us to Trump's war on Iran. The only way that any globalist entity can kill billions of people and achieve the population reduction that has been touted since the 1960s is to cut off the world's fertilizer supply and energy supply from its source, which is primarily the Persian Gulf. So that's what we're looking at now. There's a higher purpose, a globalist purpose to this war that's beyond Israel's interests, beyond America's interests, beyond energy. It's actually depopulation. And specifically, Maria, what's critical about this is that the countries that are the most at risk or the most susceptible to the depopulation agendas here are many of the same countries that were targeted through previous efforts that were attempted before, such as climate change and global warming and vaccine sterilization chemicals that were given to young women in Kenya, for example. So it's the same agenda, it's just a new form.
Right. Absolutely. You brought up fertilizer, which is a very, very important point. I know that you've been talking about this a lot. We just did an interview with Chris Martinson recently. 70% of US farms can't afford fertilizer as more energy facilities are being hit by fires. We're talking 70%, according to a recent survey, of US farmers are struggling to afford the fertilizer that they need, not for some bizarre date in the future, Mike. We're talking now.
Right. Urea prices have gone up to something like approaching $900 a ton, and they're probably going to go much higher. Now, I have an infographic I want to share with you here.
Sure.
I've got it up on my screen. Go ahead and to my crew, go ahead and show that. It's called The Coming Famine, Engineered Starvation 2027. Now, what I especially want to show you here is I did the research on which countries are the most vulnerable. And by the way, you can see here, normal fertilizer, you get 100% yield. But if your fertilizer drops even a little bit, you start to get huge drops in yield. So 10% less fertilizer can give you 25% lower yield. And if you have 50% less fertilizer, then, it's catastrophic. But these are the first countries where millions of people will starve to death. Sudan, Yemen, right, where the Houthis are, Somalia, Ethiopia, Bangladesh. Now, it's important to note that, you can finish. I'm done showing that now. But Bangladesh in particular has their own domestic fertilizer plant. They are capable of producing their own fertilizer. However, that plant needs natural gas as the feedstock. And without that gas, of course, it can't create the nitrogen-based fertilizers. So because Qatar Energy, their exports are blocked because of the war, then even these countries that had built fertilizer facilities cannot function. They can't operate those facilities. At the same time, Maria, probably you've covered this with your other guests, but China and Russia have blocked exports of fertilizers as well because they realize the urgent need to keep those for themselves domestically. So when you start to look at many, many countries around the world, especially India, for example, over 1.3 billion people, highly dependent on fertilizer imports or gas imports to create fertilizer, they are going to suffer tremendously from this. And even though they don't have as high a percentage of their population that's right on the edge of starvation like Sudan or Yemen, in terms of raw numbers, they have a much larger number of people who are going to be right on the edge of starvation deaths. Egypt will also be impacted by this in a huge way. And as I said, for North America, for the UK, for Canada, Australia, New Zealand, etc., it's going to translate into poverty. So people will be priced out of their ability to afford both food and rent, and they're going to have to make a choice. You're going to see a lot more people living out of their vans and cars and just giving up rent so that they can afford to eat. You're going to see families living in SUVs much more than you do now.
We played a clip in the intro there of Keir Starmer saying that if the Iran conflict goes on longer, then people might change their habits, where they go on holiday this year, what they're buying in the supermarket, that sort of thing. And I maintain, Mike, that when the head of the ECB tells us that we need to start preparing for food rationing, mind you, we also reported on the fact that there were leaks coming out of the UK government that they were preparing for food shortages, as well as one particular advisor saying we need to return to World War II style food rationing. My thoughts around this are, while we may not actually face a real food shortage in the West, as it would be in these other countries, they'll manufacture it so that they can transition us to food rationing regardless.
They absolutely can do that, and it's clear that there are sabotage efforts that are taking place right now globally, targeting refineries. I've published a whole map of those incidents, by the way, but also targeting fertilizer, like what happened in Australia. I'm sure you've covered that.
Yes.
And so that is deliberate, clearly, and it's designed to create exactly the situation you just mentioned, which is artificial scarcity crises, so that the people run to the government, but maybe they have no other choice. Like, you gotta help, and then governments put themselves in positions of control in order to dictate how much you're allowed to eat, what you're allowed to eat, what you're allowed to buy, and what kind of currency system you're allowed to use in order to make those purchases. So yeah, this is an engineered crisis. It's more than a war. It's actually an extension of COVID. It's the extended global depopulation of as many humans as they can kill off, and then the enslavement of those they don't kill off. So if they can kill 1 or 2 billion people through mass starvation, that's clearly aligned with what the globalists want to happen. But if there are still, 6 or 7 billion people around, they want to control them and enslave them and monitor them in every way they can. And also to, by the way, decrease their life expectancy through unhealthy foods, mineral depleted, nutritionally deficient foods. And those are the kinds of foods that you'll qualify for if you're on the government Soylent Green UBI. It basically is what it's going to be.
Right. There's actually evidence to suggest that that is very much underway. I know that you and I sort of exchanged messages about this. Palantir inking a $300 million deal with USDA to quote unquote safeguard the food supply. Now, I haven't checked as to whether this is happening in other countries in the West, Mike. I dare say it probably is, or it's about to, because this usually happens, all throughout the Five Eyes nations. So Palantir has announced a $300 million deal with the USDA, which will use the company's software in farmland management. Farmers face rising supply costs spurred by the war in Iran and an ongoing, it's a bit small for me, trade war with key partners, including China. And basically they're going to, it does say here, it's going to use the company's technology to manage farmland as geopolitical risks threaten global supply chains. So what a perfect opportunity for Palantir to sweep in and save the day as we have geopolitical tensions threatening supply chain. Mike, I mean, this is crazy.
Well, it's not even clear to me how they try to explain the concept that centralizing control over farming decisions under an AI brain would somehow make farming work better. That just makes no sense to me at all. It should be up to individual farmers. We decentralize community-based farming. That's the most redundant system. But putting it all under centralized control, which is basically, let's just call it what it is. It's techno-communism. To tell the farmers, you're allowed to plant this, but you're not allowed to plant these other things. And then to call that safeguarding the food supply, that's nonsense. First of all, I'm known as the health ranger. I've spent over 25 years investigating foods and nutrition and agriculture. There is nothing more dangerous to the food supply than centralized control. The FDA makes sure the food is dangerous. The FDA and the USDA both grandfathered in sodium nitrite, which is a cancer-causing chemical it was grandfathered in 1978 for processed meats because it makes the meats look red and look fresh when they're not. But when you eat the bacon or the beef jerky or the pepperoni on the pizza or the ham and the canned soup or the lunch meat, you're eating something that causes the formation of nitrosamines in your body, which of course it's a potent cancer-causing chemical responsible for all types of cancers in the human body, whether it's hot dogs or bacon or what have you. So if you wanted to safeguard the food supply, first of all, you would have to dismantle the entire USDA and the entire FDA, and then let food decisions be made locally and let consumers know the truth about the toxic ingredients that are used in foods. But that's not the plan, is it? It's a plan to have a top-down control in order to engineer additional scarcity for all the reasons that you and I have just talked about. So that's the real plan.
Yeah,
it's weaponizing the food system.
Well, and also, Mike, a very long time ago when we did our biodigital convergence series, which if people haven't seen, you need to go and watch it. It's a 3-part series. We squashed it all into one and released it as one video, where we were actually talking about the government of Canada, talking about biodigital convergence and what that would look like. And they were essentially describing a future where this AI that your brain's hooked up to is telling you, oh, you need this today, or you need that today, and it's going to 3D print whatever meal you need. I mean, not even real food or whatever, it's just crazy stuff. But the reality is that when you're talking about something like Palantir or any sort of AI hive mind that's been programmed by the people who have very nefarious ideas about what humanity needs to look like, what sort of quality of food are we going to expect them to have? You're talking about the AI going back all the way to Codex Alimentarius in the 1960s from the WHO, how they're going to increase the level of toxins and decrease the level of nutrients systematically in our food supply. That goes back to the 60s, the earliest documents I could find. And so what kind of programming do we think these AIs are going to have when it comes to farmland management? It's going to be continuing to increase those toxins and decrease nutrients.
Well, note that the U.S. Supreme Court is hearing the case of potential legal immunity for pesticide and herbicide manufacturers, and that Trump's DOJ is on the side of the poison producers.
Yes.
So the DOJ is pushing for legal immunity, like the vaccine industry has legal immunity. They want that for pesticide and herbicide companies. If that were established, just like in the vaccine industry, once they had legal immunity, they added, dozens of new vaccines to the childhood immunization schedule in order to achieve that legal immunity. They use human babies as vaccine pincushions in order to enjoy freedom from liability for their toxic products. The same exact thing will happen in agriculture. They will then saturate the crops like never before with all kinds of organophosphate chemicals and glyphosate and atrazine, which is a gender bender chemical that can actually cause males to express female genitalia and so much more, hormone disruption. This is the planned mass poisoning of the human food supply. It's all being done on purpose. And I want to remind you, Maria, that the research of organophosphate chemicals, for example, it really does trace back to the Nazi era and early Nazi chemists who worked on organophosphates and sarin gas, and it became the development of VX nerve gas, and then some alterations of that body of knowledge resulted in organophosphonates, which is the chemical structure inside glyphosate today, because it's a phosphorus atom at the center of the molecule. So these are chemical weapons repackaged as weed killer and now being granted legal immunity. I mean, you can't make this up. It's insidious.
I'm not sure if you saw this article floating around today, Mike, but I can't help but think of it. I'm going to bring it up for the viewers as you're talking about, the commercial food that's going to be available to people, and that scarcity and lack of choice and all of this sort of stuff and continuous poisoning. People are probably thinking, well, what stops me from going out and foraging for my food like people used to, or, connecting back with nature, going and hunting deer in the forest, or whatever the case may be. Check this out for those who haven't seen it. This is from motherjones.com. We are bombarding America's forests with Roundup. So scientists are wary of glyphosate. Maha loads it, and our year-long investigation shows California is spraying it everywhere. Now, they have just looked into California for this particular article, but can you imagine that it's, not happening everywhere? It's a very long article, but the point is here, why on earth would they be spraying forests with Roundup? Well, a number of different reasons. People go out into nature, Mike, to decompress, and you got to make sure you're poisoning them where they go and do that too. But also the animals that are in those forests are consuming this stuff. And say you want to go out and forage for whatever, you're going to be poisoned no matter where you go, essentially, is how I'm seeing this.
So I'm really glad you brought that up, because there are so many parallels between animal control in the wild and human population control and mass extermination. For example, you may or may not know that chemical I just mentioned, sodium nitrite, that's in processed meat, that's also dropped in bait to kill wild hogs. It's well known. They airdrop it all over forests of areas where the wild hogs run in America, from Texas up all the way north. And when the hogs eat the sodium nitrite, I don't know if they bleed to death internally or something like that, but it's a deadly chemical. And we're just eating it as humans in lower concentrations, and we have a little bit different physiology than do the wild hogs. But they also, state authorities drop vaccines. They drop vaccines in the wild. And that's a common practice. And when they say vaccines, of course, it's biological weapons that are designed to kill wildlife. And then there's also the biosludge issue, which I made an entire documentary about it. It's called biosludged.com. You can watch it for free. All the sewage from every city in America is hauled out of the city, and it's dumped somewhere in soils, sometimes on farmland, sometimes on orchards, sometimes on state parks, or sometimes children's playgrounds in the city, believe it or not. It's used as landscaping material, but when they really can't find a place where they can dump it on a farmer, they dump it out on state property, which then gets into the streams and rivers when it rains. And that human biosludge has, of course, every toxic chemical and pharmaceutical and birth control pills and people's, cocaine that they had to flush in a hurry or whatever else. It's all in there. Basically, that's a bioweapon. And that is allowed by the EPA to be used on soils all across America. So there are multiple vectors of mass contamination of the wild and plus genetic contamination, we could talk about that, GMO crops, things like that. But there's multiple vectors of contamination designed to really destroy the natural environment and create scarcity where people have to come to the government or the industrial food complex, which is highly toxic on purpose. And it all comes back to the thing I mentioned earlier, which is human depopulation and mass extermination through the food supply.
You mentioned the Soylent Green earlier. It was just last month, Oklahoma became, I don't know if it was the 14th or 15th state, don't quote me on that. I know there's more than 10, to legalize the use of composted human bodies as fertilizer. So that's another thing that's happening. While we have a fertilizer shortage, now we're going to use liquefied human corpses. And people thought that I was being, extreme or whatever word you want to use when Dr. Rima Labo said, no, that's absolutely their plan to feed human beings back to us. And Soylent Green was a documentary, but you have states actively advancing this legislation as we speak.
Yes, Maria, you're absolutely correct. The last time I researched that issue and wrote about it, my understanding was there were 21 states. That number may be different today.
I might be wrong. It might actually be more, but go on.
Well, you mentioned the liquefaction. So there are two different ways that states allow this to happen. One is more classical composting. You bury a human body with other organic material and you allow it to compost. But then there's the more common way, which is liquefaction, where they have a vat. They dump the human body into the vat and then they put in lye and other strong base materials in order to liquefy the skin and bones, and then they flush it down the drain. And then I call it the, human skin goo that then goes into the system for the city that then gets put onto trucks and dumped on farms. And so this has been going on for years, actually. We are, in America, we are taking the dead and applying essentially the byproducts or the resulting dead bodies onto farms right now as fertilizer, which is effectively feeding the dead back to the living. And that's not really new, actually. I mean, maybe to a lot of people watching, they didn't know about that because it's pretty insane sounding, but that's exactly what's going on. And if you know anything about prions, and prions are abnormally folded, typically neurological proteins.
Kind of like what we see from the white clots from the COVID shots.
Well, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't put them in the same functional category, but those clots that you mentioned are self-forming in the body, right? So prions do share that property. So thank you for mentioning that. But I interviewed Dr. David Lewis. He's the author of a book called Science for Sale. I actually featured him in the Biosludge documentary. He's a former top EPA scientist who tried to sound the alarm on the mass chemical contamination, viral pollution contamination, basically bioweapons contamination of the soils of our country. And he told me, this is actually in the film, he said what the EPA and the US government have done in collusion with some private sector companies that handle this waste is they've created the perfect vector for the mass distribution of biological and chemical weapons. Because what it means is that anybody can just dump, chemical weapons down the sewage system or down their own drain for that matter. And it is guaranteed that that will be distributed onto farms to contaminate the food supply. And that's the law. I mean, that's totally allowed. That's totally legal in America, in every city. And they have cute little names for it. In Austin, you know what the Austin sewage is called when they dry it? Dillo dirt.
Oh, that's how sweet.
Yeah. And then Milwaukee, all the human feces and everything that's flushed down the toilets and, all the people's waste products and hygiene products and everything, they package that up and they sell it at nursery centers for landscape use and gardening use, and they call it mill organite.
Oh, that is so disgusting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, at the time that you were researching this, Mike, I mean, where it's happening is likely more than the states that it's actually legal in. I mean, they were probably finding ways around this prior to actually giving it full authorization per the law. But I did look it up while you were talking. It says that as of 2026, human composting, specifically turning human remains into soil or compost to be used as fertilizer on farms, right? So that specific function is 14 states. Okay. And most of the laws actually they started passing in 2020, starting with Washington, and then as of last year we had Minnesota, Maine, Georgia, New Jersey, and then we had Oklahoma. It doesn't list Oklahoma here, so I'm just not entirely sure that this list is 100% correct, Mike. So regardless, I wanted to give people some of the states that I know about here: Colorado, Oregon, Vermont,
That's
California,
wild. Yeah.
New York, Nevada, Arizona, Maryland, Delaware, Minnesota, Maine, Georgia, New Jersey, and now Oklahoma as well. This is spreading like a cancer.
And it's packaged as a green practice.
Right.
See, always. And by the way, that list is probably bigger if you include the liquefaction
right,
process,
because it would be excluding that. Right. Yeah.
Right. But it's always packaged as green and eco-friendly. Well, actually, humans are, just biologically speaking, they are the most toxic in terms of their tissues of any animal, or of any creature on our planet. I don't mean to say that humans are the same as animals. What I'm saying is that if you test heavy metals, if you test
Absolutely.
the PFAS, if you test glyphosate, humans have the largest concentration of toxicity of any, more than cattle, more than
we
chickens,
consume the
obviously.
most toxins.
Absolutely.
Right.
And we put it on our bodies, with personal care like deodorants and perfumes, and then we're living in plastic houses, driving plastic cars. And, humans are incredibly toxic. And if any organism should be excluded from the fertilizer, it should be the human corpses. But it's allowed. Incredible.
It's really just a picture of where we're really at, Mike. And I know we sort of, wanted to talk more about the war and everything that is sort of currently happening as a result of the Strait of Hormuz. But really, all of this matters so much because, again, I feel like people forgot so much of this during COVID. I think that with things sort of seemingly returning to normal, though for people who've been paying attention, they have not. But for things seemingly returning to normal, people kind of forgot that there are governments out there that want you dead. And,
yes.
And they'll go to great lengths to achieve it. Just look to COVID for the perfect example. And so I want to ask you, Mike, I mean, how quickly do you see a lot of this accelerating? And if I can just tag something onto that question, Sam Altman was asked, do you foresee major cyber attacks, essentially shutting down the grid this year? And he said, oh yeah, absolutely. That's almost a certainty, essentially.
Well, you mentioned Sam Altman, and yeah, I believe he's a nefarious character, but let me bring in Elon Musk for a moment, because Elon is used by the globalist establishment, I believe, to weave friendly stories of utopia to kind of distract people from what's happening. And one of the stories that he mentions is the universal high income.
Yes.
So universal high income, you get paid more than universal basic income. And this is being pushed as the solution to AI job replacement, which has already begun and will continue to accelerate. But as I've said, the real plan is not UBI, it's DOA. They want you dead on arrival. But the UBI narrative, or the UHI narrative, is a great way to kind of lull the people to sleep, to say, oh, your future is going to be bright. You're not going to have to work. You're just going to get all the free money. And you'll be able to just live and buy and eat and, raise a family and do whatever you want, because we're going to live in a utopia. Well, that's not the plan. The plan is to mass exterminate billions of human beings. And it's obvious when you look at the economics of it. So if you try to pay, let's say, 100 million Americans, $10,000 a month, which would be a universal high income, that comes out, I believe, to $12 trillion a year, or a trillion dollars a month. Obviously, we can't just keep printing, an additional $12 trillion a year, because then the currency collapses. And what happens if all this money is created? I mean, look what happened during the money creation of COVID.
Yep.
That was a massive money creation event. And what happened? Prices have doubled and tripled in many cases on food items and basic supplies and so on. Imagine that doubling and tripling again. So, everybody's, quote, rich, but you still can't afford anything because there's too much printed currency chasing the same limited supply of goods. Printing money doesn't create abundance. The real plan is to kill people off, not to make you abundant.
And for the ones that survive, Mike, to think that these people are going to suddenly become benevolent and give you free money to do nothing and produce nothing is the most, can I use the word, the most retarded belief that I have seen thus far from people saying, well, maybe this could, this no work, free money thing could be great for me. I mean, governments have been conditioning people towards a welfare mindset for a very long time because it suits them to have people dependent on them. They're easier to control.
Well, and the only reason the human farms have been allowed to exist this whole time, since the founding of our nation, is because the government can extract the product of human labor and cognition from the people through taxation and by, inheriting the benefits of your labor. Once that is even partially replaced by AI, which is beginning to happen in, white collar jobs, for example, when the machines produce the cognition, the government says to itself, well, we don't need these humans we don't need to extract cognition and labor from them anymore. We could just have machines do it. So then the humans become a liability on the balance sheet of the government rather than a contributor to the government's wealth. So if you're a government that's almost bankrupt and you have, 330 plus million Americans that become a liability on your balance sheet and represent a threat to your dominant power, which comes from the power of your currency to maintain value, are you going to just print yourself into oblivion in order to keep those people alive that you derive no benefit from whatsoever if you're someone running this government? No, clearly not. Because the people that run our government are evil people. They're demonic, they're satanic. These aren't good people. Like if you or I were in charge of this, we would of course try to keep people alive and try to keep people healthy. But the kind of people that rise to the high level of government, whether it's Republicans, Democrats, doesn't matter, they tend to be incredibly evil people, right? So they're going to want to get rid of you. And in fact, they have to economically in order to keep themselves solvent. So then it's just going to become, well, how do we kill off billions of people around the world and say it's not our fault? Oh, war, cyber attack, aliens, whatever excuse they want to come up with, as long as it results in billions of people dying.
I want to talk about those particular things that they may pivot to. Before I do, this show today, this discussion and our work is sponsored by the Satellite Phone Store. You can visit them at sat123.com/Maria. Get yourself and your family ready to be able to communicate in the event of a disaster of any kind. Natural disaster or manufactured disaster is always around the corner in so many places. It happens unexpectedly. And the last thing you want is to be caught unprepared with no way to contact you and your loved ones or emergency services. You can get portable power stations on here, solar panels, satellite phones, Bivy and Galileo service. So please visit sat123.com/Maria today. Now, on that topic, Mike, of all the other things, I note, we were just covering these missing scientists and the fact that that it seems like potentially this could be linked to UFO, quote unquote, disclosure they keep telling us is coming, as if the government's suddenly going to tell you the truth about aliens, which of course I don't believe they're actually aliens, but that's not why I'm calling them that. That's their narrative, as if they're suddenly going to tell the population the truth. It really reminds me of Serge Monast and Project Bluebeam, and warning us that they would create this fake alien invasion as a way to usher in the New World Order. It seems to me like the trust in government is not only collapsing, but being accelerated. Like they're actually trying to make us completely lose trust in them. They don't care anymore. They're totally unconcerned about upcoming elections. Like there's just no care factor anymore, because I think they might be preparing for something of that nature. And I think, Mike, they're trying to accelerate this agenda. They've got until 2030. I think they want to do it quicker. They need major crises like cyber attack, like God knows what else, in order to really get us over that finish line. Do you think they're going to continue with the drip, drip, drip of the agenda, or are too many people onto them and they need something major?
Yeah, they're clearly planning for a major event to accelerate this timeline. And, I've heard it called a cosmic false flag, which would be the faking of alien contact or alien disclosure. And then all of a sudden we have to bow down to the demands of the aliens, who would demand that you give up your firearms and things like that, right? But of course, that would all be faked. Now, just for the record, I don't think we're alone in the universe. However, I also believe that our globalist governments will fake alien contact, because they can derive so much centralization of power from that manufactured crisis. And they have the technology to do it, clearly. They have enough control over media. They have people very gullible because, they still have fluoride in the water supply, and they've dumbed down the education system. On top of that, they have the ability to project lights in the sky or use drones. They could fake a giant, apparent image of an alien mothership or something.
Yeah.
Plus, they have deep fake videos. I mean, gosh, it's all so fake right now. Even recent events, everybody's calling them out. It looks totally fake. What happened at the dinner? What happened at the shooting? Everything just looks fake, probably because most of it is fake. So they can fake an alien invasion, and then they can use that for any means they want. I mean, you just pick your science fiction narrative, like, oh, the aliens told us that we have to contribute like 3 billion men to go fight the war against the other alien race in order to preserve Earth that's under attack, or whatever, right? And then like 3 billion men, get beamed onto the alien ship and vanish. That's called depopulation, right? So, you show up into, I mean, that's the story they would tell you, but you show up into a center and they give you a shot and they say, your consciousness is being uploaded to fight the wars to save the universe, but actually they're just killing you, But a lot of people would believe that nonsense. And what's interesting, there's a whole movie that's kind of like this. It's called Oblivion, and it stars Morgan Freeman and Tom Cruise. And it's one of my favorite movies because the entire movie is a gaslighting of the main character into thinking that he's defending Earth against aliens, when actually the aliens have already taken over, and he doesn't know it, but he's actually just a clone made by the aliens to stop humanity from rising up and taking its own planet back. Sorry about the spoiler there if you haven't seen the film.
I haven't, but I don't really like alien movies. But I've seen enough of them to sort of understand the predictive programming.
But there are no aliens really visible in that film. There are drones visible. So it's worth watching. You really check it out, because it's actually a perfect metaphor for what I think we're about to go through.
Do you know what this makes me think of, Mike? And I haven't actually spoken about this letter for a while. I'm bringing it up for the audience to see. UN 75, an unexpected message from the future. Do you remember, all of you, and if you've missed this, I'll give you a bit of background. The evangelist of the internet wrote this article, and he says that he was recently experimenting with some extremely high frequency receivers in the 125 gigahertz band when I detected an unexpected but strong and repeated signal. I recorded it, and after a considerable effort using sophisticated machine learning tools, I was able to decode the signal. It appears to have come from the future by a means unknown. The message reads as follows, and then this, demon alien is telling him, to those of you who successfully received and decoded this message, greetings. Like, they even made it sound like a little green man, right? We are Well, let me just really quickly read this,
Okay.
Mike. We're sending this message back in time from 2045 in the hope that its recipients will recognize the profound importance of the period from 2020 to our present. And they say that the past 25 years have been crucial to our survival as a society and species. For it was in 2020 that it was finally recognized that our only hope was to focus intensely and resolutely on the development of new technologies to cope with the crisis of global warming and its side effects. That's what the little green man said.
Yeah, it's very entertaining.
This
I
is
was
the
out
UN.
walking. See, there's no level too low that they won't stoop to try to panic people into control systems. But just as an interesting thing, I was out walking the other day on my ranch and noticed a sandstone that had a very interesting erosion pattern where rain had been falling on it clearly for, hundreds or thousands of years or whatever. And it had kind of carved something into the side of the stone that kind of resembled like letters, right? No, but it's a natural pattern, right? But I thought it was really cool. So as a fun experiment, I took a picture of it and I handed it over to one of my AI systems with an OCR engine. I think it was Quen visual language model. And I said to it, like, tell me what's your best guess of what word this could be if it were in English? And it came back and it says chapter innings or something like that. And like, you can take anything. If you want to tell AI, like, take your best guess. What does this resemble the most? It's going to find like the closest thing, even though it doesn't say that. But you could take anything out of nature. You could take a fern and you could take a picture of a fern. Like, what's the secret message in the fern?
Right.
It's going to find something. And it's going to guess at something. You could take anything. So just getting radio signals and then, saying, can you make a story out of the noise in the signal? Sure, AI can make up all kinds of stories about your noise. You could record a train going down the railroad tracks and you could get the same kind of story, or just traffic on the highway, Anyway, that's funny.
I'm growing increasingly concerned. You and I have had this conversation before, especially these big tech AI platforms and what's being deemed AI psychosis from people talking with these bots. And really, we already live in such an unstable society. People have very fragile minds if they're not anchored in faith. And I have no problem saying that. There are people who aren't, Christians who are strong-minded people. I'm not saying you have to be a Christian to be strong-minded. I'm just saying that is the biggest problem with society today. They're not anchored in faith, and they're easily swayed by the wind and very anxious about the coming times and everything. And AI is just making that worse. You said before, we don't know what's real, what's fake anymore. It's almost like the governments are putting out even more and more fake AI propaganda to make it more difficult for us to distinguish between reality and falsehood. It feels intentional.
Yeah, clearly it's intentional. And whereas there are people like myself who use AI daily. I'm a vibe coder. And I've even built and published AI avatars to give little educational talks. Like I have a guy from the 1950s in black and white giving economics lessons, right? But I tell everybody this is an AI avatar, obviously. And he's got a nice, 1950s detective voice and everything. It's fun. That's sort of the more responsible use of AI. But then there's the irresponsible use that you're referring to, which is the weaponization to try to trick people into thinking that they're fake AI avatars or they're fake videos that are celebrating government narratives to try to convince people that those are real. And that's exactly the way that we are going to see a lot more AI from here forward, is weaponized by government and directed as a weapon against the people, for sure.
Okay, so with that in mind, Mike, I see the propaganda's getting worse. I see the weaponization of influencers and paid, not so alternative media is getting worse. I see, I've said this before, not everyone agrees with me, but I feel like the manipulation is worse, even worse than during the COVID era right now, because there's so many things happening at once. What do you believe people should be doing right now to prepare? My advice has been become as self-sufficient and rely on the system as little as possible right now. What practical tips can you give for people?
Yeah, I think you absolutely nailed it right there, actually. It's decentralized from the system so that you are as self-reliant as possible. That gives you options for everything. So when the government is running the centralized food control system, the food UBI, you don't have to be subjected to that or a prisoner to that. In terms of the money supply, you need to get away from fiat currencies. They will also be weaponized and controlled. And so, gold and silver are some options, or maybe private crypto. I'm not a big believer in the Bitcoin public blockchain that's a spy machine at this point, but there are private crypto alternatives like Monero that I think are very valuable. And also owning other hard assets. Like right now, it'd be a good time to have a lot of diesel fuel. And I've been telling people to store a 500-gallon tank of diesel fuel for years. And, there's a lot of happy people that are sitting on 500 gallons of diesel right now that's going to carry them through the next couple of years, no matter how bad the crisis gets. So it is about decentralization, but also with food. Grow your own food as much as you can, or have food backup supplies. Be able to produce your own medicine, and that means growing herbs in many cases, and then knowing how to extract those herbs in order to make your own natural medicine. But also information. And so, Maria, I've built brightlearn.ai, and did you know we now have 53,000 free downloadable books on brightlearn.ai, and you can make your own book for free. We have 11,000 authors. We have 500 free audiobooks that you can download, and we just started working on publishing Spanish language books, and those will be coming out soon. So we'll have thousands of Spanish language books added to the system soon. They're all free, open source. You can share them, you can copy them, you can give them away, or you can create your own, and it's all free.
That is really incredible. Just confirming the link is brightlearn.ai.
Yeah, brightlearn.ai.
I'm going to bring it up for everyone right now. Brightlearn.ai is where you can find what Mike is talking about. That's really incredible, Mike. And I really admire what you've done when it comes to AI. So many people were so afraid of it. I certainly use it very cautiously for research. But what you have done with AI, actually using this for good, there are very few people in the world who've actually done that. And you've done such a tremendous job with that. So really, humanity owes you quite a bit for that, I think.
Well, thank you, Maria. That means a lot hearing that from you. And look, I believe in open source, and I believe that information wants to be free. And I believe that every human being has a divine right to knowledge. And yet we've all suffered under engineered ignorance through censorship. We've suffered under engineered scarcity, and scarcity of energy, scarcity of food, like we've talked about in this episode. But it doesn't have to be that way. And I built that platform using AI tools on top of open source tools. So I have other creators who built things, and I benefited from their efforts, and I'm just paying it forward to everybody else who can benefit. But the point is, you can download 1,000 books on self-reliant living, because there's tons of books like that on the site. And even censored topics like how to use DMSO for beating cancer, or how to use chlorine dioxide, or whatever. There's a lot of books that would be censored everywhere else, but you can find those there for free.
That's really incredible. Mike, thank you so much for your time. I think the biggest lesson that I keep taking out of all of the people that I'm speaking with of late, people who have not changed from their principles. I see a lot of people who are abandoning their principles right now, and it's really disgusting to me. I'm just going to use that word quite freely. I entered this battle because I saw what was coming with this great reset, and I wanted to help humanity as much as possible. And at this point, my message has always been the same: become as self-sufficient as you possibly can, and battle while we're living parallel lives, essentially out of the system and battling within. This is the way of the future for those who really have eyes to see and ears to hear, and no doubt they've been helped by people like you. So if you're not following Mike on X, make sure to do that at Health Ranger, though he's seriously shadow banned. You can also watch his broadcast on brightvideos.com. That's brightvideos.com. Make sure to stay updated. Health Ranger as well. Is it Mike Adams or Health Ranger on Telegram?
It's Real Health Ranger on Telegram.
Real Health
and then
Ranger.
On X, it's Health Ranger.
Okay. So make sure you're following Mike on all those platforms. I prefer Telegram, honestly, because it's just not shadow banned like the others. But you know, support Mike, follow Mike. And make sure that you're sharing the stuff that he's putting out, because there aren't many people being honest about the crisis that's coming, especially when it comes to food and the affordability and the poverty that people are going to be plunged in, even in the West. So please prepare for that. Share this with the people that you know and love as well to get them prepared. It's not about making you scared. It's about making sure that you don't get to the point where you are caught unaware and all of a sudden you have to depend on the government for your survival. I don't want anyone in that position, Mike.
Thank you, Maria. And I just want to give you kudos for your compassion and your humanitarian streak here as well. You and I both share the high integrity values for humanity. And, you know, we are not for sale. We can't be bought off or compromised. We stick to our integrity and our principles no matter what. And that's what's going to, if we can find enough others like us, we're going to make it through this together.
I'm on a mission to talk to them all, Mike.
Please do. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you.
All right. You too. Take care.
The New World Order has openly declared war on the free people of the world, and now they're telling us to expect catastrophic cyber attacks over the next 2 years. Weather events, no power, grids down, mobile cell services out. Contact your loved ones anywhere, anytime with the satellite phone store. The Bivy is a revolutionary GPS-based device which allows you to send SMS messages via your phone even if you have no mobile or cell service. Galileo will ensure you always stay in contact with Z Media, other trusted information sources, and your loved ones that can update you in real time in the event of an emergency. Don't be caught out and unprepared for the unprecedented times we are living in. Stay 10 steps ahead through secure, encrypted communication. Visit sat123.com/Maria and prepare yourself and your loved ones now.